Bonjour, mon nom est Caroline Cotty, je suis la présidente fondatrice de la gouvernance au féminin et c'est un immense plaisir de vous accueillir ici aujourd'hui. It is an immense pleasure for me to be here today and to host a fireside chat with Catherine Tate, an amazing woman that I got a chance to meet a couple of years ago as we were both nominated on the National Task Force for Gender Equality in Canada. And I will begin by sharing a brief bio. Catherine Tate was appointed president and CEO of CBC Radio-Canada in 2018 for a 5-year term. She's also the chair of the Global Task Force for Public Media, an initiative of the Public Media Alliance launched in September 2019. As president and CEO of CBC Radio-Canada, Catherine was responsible for overseeing the management to ensure that Canada's national public broadcaster can deliver on the various aspects of its mandate and continue to offer Canadians a broad spectrum of high quality programming that informs, enlightens, and entertains, and that is created by, for, and about Canadians. Prior to her appointment, Catherine co-founded New York-based Duopoly Inc., an independent film, television, and digital content company, which she led as president from 2002 to 2018. She also co-founded iThentic, a digital content company in 2006, and Hollywood Suite in 2010, a broadcasting company in Canada. Catherine was also previously the president and CEO of Salter Street Films from 1997 to 2001. She has experience working for the Government of Canada as director and cultural attaché with the Canadian Culture Center in Paris, always a nice idea, Paris, and as manager of policy and planning for Telefilm Canada, where her passion for Canadian film and television content was ignited. She's member of a number of industry-specific boards, too many to name here. Catherine holds a Diplôme d'études approfondies, communications theory from the University of Paris, a Master of Science from Boston University School of Public Communication, and a Bachelor of Arts in Literature and Philosophy from the University of Toronto. And in 2019, Catherine Tate was named Playback's Executive of the Year. I tried to narrow the bio down, but it was hard with so many important achievements. And also because I wanted to highlight your stellar career and how well-deserved your nomination as the first female president of CBC Radio-Canada is. So just to give a bit of background to...
I think all it does is tell everybody how old I am.
Oh, come on. No, how well achieved you are. So for everyone listening, pour les francophones et les anglophones, well, this event is going to be mainly in English, mais on va poser quelques questions en français à la fin de l'événement. Alors, restez bien à l'écoute. Il y aura un peu de français, but because this event is broadcast across the country and we also have some people from the United States joining us, the majority of the event will take place in English. Now, Catherine, can you please tell us how this nomination as president and CEO of CBC Radio-Canada came about and share some of your key successes as well as some obstacles that you may have faced during your career?
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, so much for this invitation. Et merci beaucoup tout le monde pour assister à cet événement aujourd'hui. I've had a somewhat unconventional career path, as Carolyn described. And I would say that if I had to define that path, it was really about taking risks and jumping at opportunities when they arose. And that led to a number of leadership jobs in the early years of my career. But I think for me, probably the most important decision was when I decided to strike out on my own as a business owner and entrepreneur. So I would say for me, ultimately, the obstacles that I might have faced in, let's say, a more traditional environment, I circumvented by becoming a business owner and an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of women make that choice because of the obstacles. But on the other hand, I would also say, as much as I know we can talk a little bit about what it means to be the first woman to run CBC Radio-Canada, at the end of the day, we really must remember that the talent that women have and the opportunities that we can offer women are really at the core of being a truly representative society. And that's, what I hope that I've brought to CBC Radio-Canada, not just for women, but for people of all underrepresented groups.
Extremely important to highlight what you've done to really actually succeed, which is come out of your comfort zone, really, right? You overcame some fears, you took risks. Do you feel that women tend to be less, or more risk averse than men when it comes to their careers?
Oh, absolutely the opposite. I mean, I think any woman watching or any of the people in our community would say that we are fundamentally risk takers because we have to adapt in ways that perhaps our male counterparts don't. And I mean, again, mon parcours, the way you described it, really was about most often responding to mentors, both male and female, who encouraged me to take that risk, to jump at an opportunity. Mind you, it wasn't so hard jumping at Cultural Attaché in Paris, needless to say. But moving to Halifax from New York City, where I was living with a little baby at the time, and taking my husband with me to go and live in Nova Scotia to run Salter Street Films. That was a great example of, I had never run a publicly traded company. And that was just a huge learning. So it was about risk taking and learning. And I think women have an enormous appetite for both.
So that's one stretch assignment that you've accepted there.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'd say the biggest stretch assignment has been the one that I'm in right now.
Yes, surely. And so tell us about the importance of partners that need to support their spouses' decisions in something like this. How did your husband take it when you made that decision? Was he supportive, and what did he do with his own career?
Well, my husband is a sculptor, so I'm lucky that he travels well. Let's put it that way. As long as there's a studio and the materials that he needs to build his sculptures, he's fine. He really doesn't. He's been very, very supportive and open to my career changes, and they have involved moving, a lot of them, and for me, I often say to younger women that I am a mentor for, that zigzagging in your career is a way of jumping ahead. And oftentimes, and I know people feel that they need to progress within an organization in a straight line. And I say, no, for women, we have to be even more creative. And sometimes that zigzag is the thing that will cause you to jump over some of the obstacles that you might find if you were staying within one context for many, many years.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I spent more than a decade in the career management space. And that was something that I would always tell executives who were in career transition. You can't just expect the next job to be a logical continuation of what you're doing now. You need to be able to change completely maybe your direction and learn new skill sets, and it's just going to make you stronger. And when you're just waiting for the next job above what's above your head, and that person might not be leaving, find other ways to as you said, zigzag and leave an organization that's not recognizing your value. I've done that in my own career, and I can tell you, especially when it comes to salary, that is definitely the best way to increase your capacity to make money by by changing roles. Now, you also chair the Global Task Force, which is a group of 8 leaders of major public service media from around the world. We've got US, Germany, UK, France, New Zealand, Korea, Sweden, and of course, Canada. It's a relatively new group. Can you tell us, first of all, why you accepted to chair it? And second of all, what your mandate is?
Well, I am the chair, the founding chair of the group. So yes, it is new. And it really was an opportunity for a small group of public service media or public broadcasters from around the world to come together on key issues and take quick decisions to issue statements or to influence governments where we feel situations may have arisen, whether it's safety for journalism or a threat to independence in public broadcasting. And it turned out to be perfectly timed because quite frankly, with COVID, we were able to come together and really be able to emphasize how public broadcasting during this pandemic has unbelievably, punched above its weight, let's say. We're living in a world of global entertainment companies, global media companies, and they're awesome. Netflix and Amazon and Apple, they're fantastic, vehicles for entertainment. But during a crisis, where do people turn? They turn to their domestic public broadcaster, or it could be a private broadcaster as well. But they turn to their domestic media for information, for correction of disinformation, for guidance, and for support. Because at the end of the day, we experience the pandemic or any crisis very much at the local level. So what the Global Task Force has done, I believe, has really played a role in shouting loud from the mountaintops on, please protect your public broadcaster. Do not let this unbelievable resource be in any way undermined, either through funding or through misinformation.
Fake news, I mean, that's become a huge thing. When did it all start? I mean, we've been hearing about fake news probably mainly in the Trump era. Was it there before?
Well, I mean, fake news was called fake news perhaps more frequently by President Trump, but it certainly the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation was born with the internet, and then more recently with social media. And what social media has done is given a megaphone to everyone. We all have the ability to express our opinion, rightly or wrongly, on Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube. And what that has done is it has given credence to what we just commonly call bad actors, people who are in the business of telling lies. And whereas some of that might seem benign if it's, making fun of a celebrity or something, it's not benign for the celebrity, but it may not seem so harmful. It becomes profoundly dangerous when you're misrepresenting world events, bombs falling in a country, or even worse, lies about politicians or about public figures that really damage them. So we've seen this proliferation of what I call, really toxic communication. And just to segue to another subject, we've seen women journalists, racialized journalists, and women racialized journalists together, being really the disproportionately targeted by this vile, toxic misinformation.
Yes, we've heard, that in recent years, the harassment and intimidation that many journalists face online, particularly, and women particularly, has grown dramatically. There's a pattern as well that connects these campaign hates online to what actually happens, the violence that happens in real life. Now, did that all get amplified during COVID? Did it get worse?
Well, I would say everything was amplified during COVID. You must have noticed in your own life. Anything that we saw as a kind of a societal or even an industry trend accelerated during COVID. So, for example, the number of people who took subscriptions to online video streaming services, it was all happening before, but it's accelerated during COVID. And I would say the intensity of the harassment or online harm has definitely stepped up. And that very much is linked to polarization in our society. And again, this business of everyone having a megaphone on social media platforms has also allowed groups that perhaps would not have been heard to come together and to be more focused in their efforts. So, for example, if we look at the anti-vaxxer movement, mm-hmm. You'll see groups gathering in a way that you might not have seen 10 years ago. We've seen also very disturbingly, not just online harm, but we've seen physical acts of violence against our own journalists during rallies where a journalist is trying to cover the story. So, for example, the storming of the Capitol in Washington, where our own journalists become the target of the demonstrators. So this is all very worrisome because at the end of the day, it undermines the trust people have in media. And with that undermining of trust, you actually have an erosion of the democratic society that we all value.
Well, I mean, we should all be able to expect to receive news and information that's accurate, that's impartial, that's free from any commercial or political influence. That's the hallmark of public media. But how can we protect these journalists who are the first targets? They're trying to provide this, but they face what you just talked about, whether at the Capitol, mm-hmm. there are many other examples, even right here in Quebec, during the beginning of the pandemic, there was this French journalist who was accosted by two men. She was wearing a mask and they were doing an anti-mask protest, and they came and they were hugging her as if they were allowed to touch her this way and breathe down her neck. I mean,
yes, it's very disturbing. Well, we have at CBC Radio-Canada, we have taken a number of actions. I mean, first of all, I should say, I'm hoping very much that the government of Canada will be putting forward a projet de loi, a bill on that addresses online harm. And much like Australia and some other countries in the world, where we would actually have a commissioner or a mechanism by which we could address this growing threat, because it's a threat to our civil discourse and to our society. But in the short term, because we know bills can take some time, in the short term, what we're doing at CBC Radio-Canada is really putting in place protocols. First of all, to support our journalists. And it's not just journalists, it's camera people, it's all the technicians that are out there driving the truck and around. We're putting in protocols to give them the emotional support they need, the psychological support they need, because it's very, very stressful to be attacked constantly. And some of our higher profile on-air hosts are the subject of constant harassment. We have some online protocols to create walls, if you can, around some of our journalists that are particularly vulnerable. And most importantly, we're trying to work with the social platforms themselves, like Twitter, Facebook, to have them be more accountable here in Canada. The problem with these large global organizations is they have policies. One policy does not fit all. And we as Canadians absolutely need to make it clear that Twitter and Facebook and others have a responsibility to take down this offensive material when it is put up on their platforms.
So are you seeing journalists leave the workforce just because it's too much to handle for themselves, for their families and their security?
Well, we know UNESCO published quite recently a report on online hate and harassment. And in particular, they measured that women and racialized journalists were in greater numbers leaving the industry because of this constant barrage of toxic attack. And really what it is at the end of the day, it's a way of trying to silence women. And it's a way of, and that silencing is a deep form of misogyny. And so we have great concern that we would lose women, or that women might not find it an attractive vocation. We know that for politicians as well, by the way, that people hesitate. Why would I put myself out there? To what end? To be attacked and to be, just constantly insulted in public. So why is that a concern? Because if you lose women, if you lose racialized journalists in our media industry, you lose the diversity of voices. And that is, again, a profound attack on our democracy, because our democracy is based on the diversity of opinion, diversity of points of view. And as you said, it is key to our ability to really, truly reflect in an impartial, accurate way our society.
Absolutely. And that 2020 UNESCO report that you were referring to actually says that the proportion of journalists being killed in countries with no armed conflict jumped from 50% of the total number of journalists killed in 2016 to 61% in 2019. So there's the online, but there's the real life, which actually happens as well. Now, to go back to this whole importance of the diversity and diverse points of view, what do you do to ensure that in front and behind the camera, there's a better reflection of the image of society, whether it's women, whether it's people of color or of diverse backgrounds?
Well, first of all, at CBC Radio-Canada, we take our responsibility as the national public broadcaster to truly reflect all Canadians, which is our mandate. And we are the only broadcaster in the country that has all Canadians in its mandate. We take that very seriously. And we ask ourselves, are we in fact serving all Canadians if they don't see themselves on the screen? So how do we ensure that all groups see themselves either on the screen or behind the camera or in the stories we're telling or in the lens that we shine on the news? And that is central to the diversity and inclusion action plans that we've put in place. And I can say we have been successful with women. CBC Radio-Canada has close to 50% of its employees are women. We have over 55% of our journalists and our hosts are women. And so my point when we talked about this, this kind of awakening that occurred on the social justice platform this past summer, we said, well, if we could do it for women, we can certainly do it for others, and we need to, and we must. And so we applied a greater urgency and acceleration to tangible results to make sure. So it's in our workforce, so our journalists, making sure there's greater representation. It's in our work culture, and that has to do with all of our policies and how we choose the stories we cover, and then in the content. And that will be the work that we do with independent producers to make sure that everybody in Canada, when they tune in, they see themselves, they read about themselves, and they hear about themselves.
Such important work. Maintenant, une question en français, Catherine.
Oui.
La pandémie, comment est-ce que la pandémie a impacté les femmes? Quand tu regardes autour de toi, chez Radio-Canada, CBC, les employés qui te côtoient, est-ce que tu as vu des augmentations au niveau de la violence conjugale? Est-ce qu'il y a eu un impact sur la santé mentale? Comment est-ce que tu fais en tant que chef d'entreprise pour t'assurer du bien-être de la population autour de toi en pleine pandémie?
Oh, c'est une très bonne question, Caroline. D'abord, la priorité de l'entreprise au départ, c'était en fait la santé de nos employés. Et c'est pour ça qu'il fallait tout de suite déployer presque tous nos employés, c'était 80% en télétravail. Et puis là, ce qu'on a vu, on a constaté qu'après quelques mois, c'était les femmes, je ne veux pas généraliser parce qu'on sait très bien qu'il y a des hommes qui sont très, très bien et tout ça, mais c'était surtout beaucoup plus stressant pour les femmes qui travaillaient de la maison avec des enfants à côté, qui essaient de suivre les cours d'école, et c'était énormément de pression. Alors, il a fallu changer nos attentes et puis travailler avec nos employés femmes pour qu'elles puissent trouver un équilibre vie personnelle et le travail. En tout ce qui se concerne la santé mentale, c'est sûr, hein, même si nous, on n'est pas des frontline workers comme les médecins, les infirmières, tout ça, on était quand même juste après parce qu'il fallait continuer de faire toute la couverture des nouvelles, tous les reportages et puis en même temps augmenter toute l'information sur la COVID, etc. Alors, c'était énormément, une surcharge de travail, il faut dire. Alors là, on a quand même essayé de trouver des façons pour mieux soutenir et appuyer nos employés avec si je peux dire, en fait, des médecins virtuels, ce genre de choses, pour essayer de les accompagner pendant cette période difficile. Et ça continue toujours, hein?
Et tout ce qui touche à la violence conjugale, est-ce qu'il y a eu des initiatives pour aider des femmes qui étaient peut-être victimes?
Ben, ce genre de choses, en fait, c'est privé. On a quand même des programmes à l'intérieur si jamais il y a eu des cas de harcèlement ou de violence. Mais en général, ce qu'on a trouvé, c'était si on a des programmes de... je vais passer en anglais pour 2 secondes.
Oui.
Mental health programs work only if the person involved wants the help. Et on sait très bien qu'avec ce genre de problème, c'est quelquefois beaucoup plus compliqué parce que la personne n'ose pas admettre qu'il y a un problème. Alors, c'est sûr que, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, toutes les tendances qui étaient dans notre société avant la COVID, on se sent accélérées et pendant cette période de crise. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a tellement hâte que ça termine, en fait.
Effectivement, tout s'est amplifié, on l'a bien
amplifié, voilà, c'est ça.
Et Catherine, une autre petite question rapide sur le Global Task Force. Comment est-ce qu'on se situe, nous, au Canada, par rapport aux autres pays qui sont impliqués dans ce Global Task Force? There's US, Germany, UK, France, New Zealand, Korea, and Canada. How do we, and you can choose to answer in French or in English, mais comment est-ce qu'on se situe au Canada pour toutes les questions qui entourent le online hate ou la violence faite aux journalistes, etc.?
Ben, il faut dire que même si sur tous les diffuseurs publics au monde, nous, on est les moins financés, hein? Radio-Canada et CBC. So we're on number 16 of 17 in terms of per capita financing. Having said that, we punch above our weight. Alors, pour tout ce qui est la diversité et inclusion, parité homme-femme, pour ce genre de questions, nous, on est beaucoup plus avancés ici au Canada. Et c'est pour ça que les autres pays nous trouvent intéressants pour voir, bon, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire comme les Canadiens, surtout sur la diversité, hein. Alors là, c'est comme, moi, j'ai trouvé que même s'ils sont mieux financés, ils sont quelquefois moins avancés sur des problèmes sociaux, comme j'ai parlé tout à l'heure.
Mais c'est probablement en lien avec la culture canadienne qui est vraiment très inclusive et très bienveillante, hein, je pense. Est-ce que justement à ce niveau-là, all those questions of hate, whether online or in person, are we nicer in Canada?
No, we're not. I hate to say it. No. And we saw that with the around the events of the murder of George Floyd, we saw how the racism, systemic racism exists in Canada too. We can't be smug about our multiculturalism, and we certainly, in some aspects, we are certainly a more diverse population, but we know that racism exists. And we know it's systemic in many of our public institutions, including the public broadcasters. So there's a huge amount of work to be done. Are we better or worse than other countries? I don't think that's relevant. We have to look at our own situation and really dig in and address the problems that we have, the societal, systemic problems that we have, to make sure that everybody has access to equal pay and equal treatment, man, woman, whatever.
Absolutely. And this is an important question that I want to ask you now, of course, because it touches the work that we do at Women in Governance. CBC Radio-Canada, for the second year in a row, has received our parity certification at the platinum level. So kudos, congratulations. As you know, 58 organizations have been recognized this year. From bronze to platinum, only 8 made it to the platinum level. And again, Radio-Canada, CBC Radio-Canada was among those. Can you share with us some of the, first of all, the impact of doing all this work to close the gender gap in the workplace and enhance diversity and inclusion? And second of all, what makes you the most proud of that work that's being done?
Well, I'll start with the fact that the work is never done. Even though we have a 50-50 in our workforce, and we have 50% at our senior executive team and 50% on our board of directors, women, the work is never done. I am, after all, the first woman in 80 years to run the CBC Radio-Canada. And I hope I'm not the last. It really is an ongoing commitment. So that's point number one. Point number two is you have to measure. And you cannot stop measuring. And that's where your organization is so helpful, because it gives the balises, the guardrails on and the parameters for how to measure effectively. And that's very, very important. So we have, whereas we've done it in our workforce, and I would say in management, where we have, again, an enormous journey ahead is in the other equity-seeking groups who are underrepresented. And so, for example, in Women in View, the group that tracks the entertainment industry, they pushed us broadcasters to reach 50-50 in our women directors. We surpassed that number and got to 60% women directors. But then you look at other areas and you say, wait a minute, how many of those women directors were women of color or women from other underrepresented groups? Oops, another lacune, another gap. So it's really, really important measuring, accountability, reporting, and of course, as the public broadcaster, transparency so the public understands where the progress is. But the thing that I'm really most proud of, Caroline, is that we are the only media company in Canada that has the level of representation that CBC Radio-Canada has. And it does make a difference. It is reflected in the content that we produce and in our audience response. So it's good business. It's just good business because we see our audiences respond to when they see themselves. So anyway, it's a wonderful work that you do, and I can say that we are delighted and proud to be at one of your platinum. What do we call ourselves? Certified
organization. Yes.
Thank you. Right.
Yes. And we're so proud to have you as well. And so very eloquently put, you have to measure, you have to report, transparency is key. And I would add, you have to remeasure yourself every year and benchmark yourself according to your industry, your cohort, but also to the year before. We are pushing organizations to keep progressing. Today's platinum is not tomorrow's platinum. Our criteria keeps getting more and more demanding, of course, because the world is changing and we keep introducing new elements, like, for instance, what you refer to other underrepresented groups. So we've got the intersectionality piece where we look at, of course, we look at women at every level, from entry level all the way to the executive committee and the board, but we look at the particular obstacles that are facing women of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, women of color, LGBTQ, women with disabilities, etc., because it is important to also measure that and ensure that they are part of the equation and no one is left behind. So thank you for your trust on that and your continuous progress. So in a few minutes, we will ask Annick Robinson to join us. So if you've got any questions from the public to Catherine Tait or to myself for that matter, please feel free to put them in the chat and Annick will share them with us. Catherine, one last point while people are thinking of their questions before we open Annick's mic. I want to talk about when you were appointed as president and CEO of CBC Radio-Canada. I obviously followed that very closely because I'm always there to shed a light on female pioneers, women who are doing, and it's crazy that in this day and age, we're still celebrating the first woman doing this and that, because I'm looking forward to the time where women will have been everywhere. But there's one thing that really struck me when your announcement was made, and that was the backlash, the scrutiny that you were facing of people saying, well, is she the right person? Does she have everything that it takes? And you know, I would have wanted to answer all those detractors, but how did you react to that? And what were your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure, and I don't want to overstate it, but anybody who enters into a high-profile public service position does so with their eyes wide open, and you become part of the public debate. Doesn't matter, man, woman, doesn't matter. You will be part of the debate. Do I feel that the scrutiny or the bar is tougher on women in these jobs? Of course it is. Of course it is. And do I think that there's an element of hoping she will fail? Yeah, yes, of course. And that continues in our society. And and we see that when we talked about online hate, it is shocking to me that there are still people who hold these beliefs around women's abilities, or that somehow commenting on a woman's point of view starts with how she looks, her weight, you know, and possibly even whether she's wearing a hijab. So
right.
to me, it is a profound concern. It's a collective concern. But, you know, I just felt like, great, bring it on. And what I learned, I didn't really know at the outset what it meant to be the first woman to run CBC Radio-Canada. And what I've said on a number of occasions, and I think I said it at your gala, I'll say it again here, is that I realized in the last year that I got my foot in the door here, and I'm not taking the foot out of the door, because I want to leave the door open for others to come in beside me, others who've been looking in, as I did throughout my career, looking in the window at others. You know, don't forget, 90% of C-suite positions in this country are still held by men, 90%. So, you know, I hope that by example or by policies that we've put in place will make it easier for the next generation of women and all the people out there who are not adequately represented.
And I will add that a third of publicly traded companies in Canada don't have one woman around the boardroom table. So we still have a long way to go. I know that we are seen globally as a change agent. Canada is gender equality, but you know what? It is not all the way to the top though. So it depends where you're looking. So thank you in the name of all the women for opening this door. And I know you will hold it wide open for other women to follow you. And kudos for remaining calm while you're being attacked for things that nobody would have ever question, had you been a man? And that I am completely convinced of. So voilà, now I'd like to open the questions to the public. I will invite Annick Robinson. Here she is. So Annick is head of communications at Alstom. Well, recently Alstom. She used to be at Bombardier, and then they were purchased by Alstom. And Annick is also not only a very good friend of mine for a few decades, but she also chairs our communications and media relations committee at Women in Governance, doing amazing work with a very engaged committee of volunteers. And one other point about our amazing committees of volunteers, I say hello to all of those who are involved with us. We have 4 major committees. And 3 of our co-chairs are about to give birth. So including Annick, who I think is giving birth in a week or 2, not more. So thank you for being here, Annick. And that's another testament to how women can do it all, have a career, be a volunteer, and show up 9 months pregnant to manage a Q&A period for a very, very inspiring and powerful lady, Catherine Tait. Alors, je te laisse prendre la balle au bon et poser tes questions.
Merci, Caroline. Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure. It's my last public event before I prepare to take maternity leave, but a very, very important topic. And I have worked my whole career in non-traditional environments. So I wanted to lead the Q&A, Catherine, if you allow, with a question of my own. Because this number of having achieved 50% equality for women, we can only dream of in our non-traditional, environments. We're still building towards a number that great, especially at the director and within leadership levels. So to me, that's incredibly admirable. But I'm thinking our audience probably knows CBC Radio-Canada through your content. So my question to you is, how has shifting the number over to 50%, how has that actually shifted your content? And can you give us like a tangible example of what we're seeing now being broadcast, which we couldn't have imagined, 5, 10, 15 years ago?
It's a great, great question, Annick. And I can say that we made a decision some years ago to, as I mentioned with Caroline, to ensure that women directors would be in all of our commission programming. And then in the writers' room also. So most TV series have many writers, and we wanted to have parity there as well. And what we've seen is more and more shows actually being created by women. And that's where you get a very interesting shift to your question about content. Would you have ever imagined a show like Working Moms or a show like Baroness von Sketch, an all-woman sketch show 10 or 20 years ago? Absolutely not. And those kinds of shows, it make a huge difference because, again, we know that women are tuning in to CBC in particular in higher numbers than men. In fact, women watch more primetime television than men do. So therefore, it's really important to serve them. And having those points of view and having the writers, another show would be The Coroner, is also created by a woman showrunner. On the French side also, so many of our programs now, we make an effort with the independent producers to ensure that there are women at the table. And again, it may be a subtle difference, or it may be a really profound one, like in the case that I gave you, Working Moms.
Thank you. I actually love both of those shows because they so profoundly reflect and justify the real experiences of women, which so far have been absent in most media, where we see women as being, there's not a lot of place for older women or women through all of the, motherhood experiences and the types of aggressions and microaggressions we experience. I do have a question coming from the public. Someone is asking you, Catherine, if you can share both a personal and a professional anecdote, maybe of a regret that you had along the way of your career. And if you could go back, what would you change?
A regret. Well, I'm somebody, first of all, who doesn't live in the past, so it's going to be hard for me to find one. And I do fundamentally believe that you're on this planet once in this body, so there's no point in regretting anything. but I will say one thing, and maybe for the younger viewers, I came from a family where business was somehow considered not as good as public service. My father was a diplomat. My mother was also in the public service. And so for whatever reason, I was not encouraged to pursue business. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, I came to business through literature and philosophy and all sorts of other areas. But I would have really, at some point, I think I would have liked to have had a little bit more exposure to finance, because oftentimes, especially in boardrooms, they not having technical knowledge of tax or, you know, some of the finer financial issues that, especially in a publicly traded company, I had to work triply hard to keep up. So that it's not a huge regret, but I would say it would have been something that would have helped me along the way. And I think women sometimes we are attracted to the softer subjects because they're more human and they feel richer. But those technical, whether it's a science or a legal or a financial skill set, can be very, very helpful, especially when you're zigzagging.
Very good. And so someone is asking another question, which I guess just what I just touched upon, that, you know, we're used to seeing women in the media very young, over-sexualized, very thin, you know, in terms of character and image. So Joanna is asking, what about ageism? How do you see that? Is that more present for women? And how is CBC Radio-Canada tackling that in its content?
Well, as I said, anything in our society is, again, amplified for women, positive and negative. So, and ageism, again, is something that all of us, and certainly when you get to a certain âge, it becomes even more of an issue in business, where we disappear from the table. But what we do at CBC Radio-Canada is we have a kind of a series of filters that we bring to every programming decision. And the filters are, how is this connected to place? Whether it's rooted in Saskatoon or in a small town in northern Quebec. How does this speak to place? How does this speak to who we are as whatever the community is? Whether it's Indigenous or whether it's a show like the new show that we'll be launching next year at CBC called The Porter, which was about Black porters in the train system and the first Black run union. And then we also look at, are we representing people with disabilities? Are we representing older people? And so it's through this kind of incredible, I mean, we get over 1,000 pitches on just the English side and another on the French side. And we only end up with a few new shows every year. So it's all of those filters that our programming executives are constantly balancing to come up with a show. It's gone out of my head. In Radio-Canada, Les Parents, Avec Mes Parents, I can't remember the comedy show. And then on the English side, in a web series called Hey Lady, with a wildly outrageous older woman. I don't know if you've seen it, just won a bunch of CSAs and it won an award at Sundance, I think. We try to see where can we make sure that all of those faces are represented in a fair way and not in a stereotypical way. I mean, and I urge that whoever asked that question, tune into Hey Lady, because it's extremely funny.
We have enough time for about 2 more questions. So if the audience wants to submit a question, we still have a little bit of time. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you one question with regards to the young women coming up today. They have grown up in this age of social media. They don't know any different. And especially coming through this pandemic year where women have been increasingly targeted with online hate, in this era of polarity. So do you have advice for young women out there now considering maybe a career in media and journalism? What advice would you give them as they, consider this as a future for themselves?
Well, first of all, it is the most amazing career that you can choose. I'm biased, of course. But here's the thing about production or about news or about this creative industry. We're not in the shoe business. We're not in the widget business. We're in the business of creating something new each and every day. And the power of that and the adrenaline that goes with that and the thrill of creating constantly is just irresistible. So one, I would say, if your instinct takes you there, go with it, because there is nothing more satisfying. I have never had a boring day in my life doing this work. So that's point number one. Point number two, with respect to your observations, Anik, yes, it's tough. And it's still, I would say, and we hear this in Hollywood and in our media industry in Canada, it still remains a very sexist industry. And so what the key for me was to find your allies early on, find your women colleagues that will support you, make deep friendships with your colleagues, and you'll be amazed. Like when I founded or co-founded Hollywood Suite, the broadcasting company that Caroline mentioned earlier, I did so with one of my mentors, Jay Switzer, who was the CEO of Chum. And so he called me up and said, come and join me in this venture. There were some other people involved as well. But that was from a relationship that I had made 15 years prior. So you don't know who will reappear in your life. And if you're young today, you never think, oh, what will happen 20 years from now? But I assure you, the people that I've encountered all through my career, both in Canada and in the United States and in Europe, have all popped up in different places. And it almost became my, I don't want to say security blanket, but became my protection to the adversities that I might have faced, having those people support me.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was one of my reserve questions, was to ask you about coaching and mentoring as well, the role that had. So you've kind of somewhat answered it there. But we do have a member of the public who's asking us a question. A provocative one. How do you think men responded or changed in the workplace at CBC Radio-Canada as women became more visible and vocal?
I think people, first of all, who are attracted to working at CBC Radio-Canada are people who are interested in the mandate and the public service aspect. And so I would say in general, the men and the women that work at CBC Radio-Canada tend to be of a more open nature because they're interested in public service. You don't choose to work at public service in a public service environment for the big bucks. If that was what was driving you, you'd go and work in a private media company. So that just general openness, I think, was there. I have not observed, certainly in my time at CBC Radio-Canada, any hostility from the men. I think that there's a general acceptance that women bring an enormous amount to the table. I do think these are challenging times for white men. Let's just be very frank, given the focus on underrepresented groups. But honestly, it's about time. So it's overdue. And, I want to be compassionate to my male colleagues. Obviously, I work on that every day. But I do think that we've, at CBC Radio-Canada, we really have, it's really integrated. The gender parity piece, I think, is fully integrated. Though that you mentioned that, it was very amusing when I was first meeting Caroline, and I asked a colleague, could you find me something about the treatment of women at CBC Radio-Canada from the past? And this colleague brought me a book, a little booklet, that it was a report that had been published in the 70s. About gender parity, or the lack thereof, at CBC Radio-Canada. And they described women as being particularly suitable to being secretaries because of their small hands, and which allowed them to be more dexterous and flexible. Also, because they had family obligations, they weren't as distracted by office politics. I kid you not.
Wow.
That was 50 years ago. It's taken 50 years to make those the idea that anybody would talk about the size of someone's hands because to be a better typist is ridiculous today. But it will take another 50 years to see the really profound societal change that we need in terms of ensuring all underrepresented groups are at the table and make room for all of them.
Fascinating. If I can jump in, Annick, real quick, there's a question that I meant to ask about the recent nomination as news anchor of a woman wearing a hijab, I believe at CBC.
Yes, Janella Massa.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And there was a bit of a backlash there too. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that people were surprised, particularly on the French side, because obviously Quebec has a different treatment in this regard. But there's no reason why, by the way, there wouldn't be a similar appointment at Radio-Canada, because it's really a decision that we make based on competence. And in the case of Janella Massa, she has been a leading journalist. She's a huge catch for us. She's been a leading journalist for some of the private media for some time. She's an enormously talented journalist, and her show is fabulous. And she's bringing points of view that we have not seen. We've had an outstanding response from the public, especially among, as you can, no surprise, among Muslim women who are delighted that their daughters see a powerful, smart woman like Janella on air. So I think it's a great accomplishment for the public broadcaster. Really proud of it. Thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah, and as she says, I think people should worry more about what she has inside her head than on her head.
Caroline, if you allow, I have one last kind of big question for Catherine. So 2020, we look back on 2020, unprecedented pandemic in our times, the Black Lives Matter movement, political unrest, political polarity, the impact that all of that had on women during the course of 2020 and continuing now into this next wave of the pandemic. How has that been? It has been challenging for every CEO of every organization in every sector, in every industry. And you, Catherine, how did it affect your boardroom over the past year and a half? And how has that changed the way that you've led as a CEO?
Wow, that's a huge question. I think what I certainly learned from this year is the importance of staying connected. And when I talked about compassion a few moments ago, really that empathy, it's one of our core values as a leadership team. And it really came to the fore during the pandemic. Having the time for the employees, stepping up we do a monthly all staff calls, all manager calls, staying connected, helping people through this. It was really about leading with heart. And it became less about hitting every target. If we missed a target, that was okay. It was about making sure people were safe, and it was making sure that Canadians had the information they needed. And that was, and also helping our cultural creators stay working. I mean, there were a lot of different priorities that we addressed during this time. I was lucky. I have an amazing board of directors. They jumped right into the fray. At the beginning, we were meeting, practically monthly, just to deal with the shift. I mean, people think of CBC Radio-Canada as this huge bureaucratic organization. We pivoted on a dime. And I don't think most people would not even have noticed a difference. If anything, they liked what we did during this time. We saw our numbers shoot through the roof. We had at the peak of the last months, we were at 24 million Canadians coming to our digital platforms each month. And that put us as the #1 Canadian digital destination behind Google and Facebook and Microsoft.
Wow.
Fantastic. Well, it was a great answer, Catherine. Thank you so much. I'm going to shift back to Caroline so that she can close our session for us today.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Annick, d'avoir pris le lead sur la période des questions-réponses du public. Thank you so much. And of course, a huge thank you to Catherine Tait. It was an immense pleasure for us to host you here today. Thank you for your candor and for all the great inspiration that you represent. As a concluding few words, I just want to encourage anybody who's watching our discussion to, well, first of all, join our newsletter to be sure to never miss one of these events. We've had 3 major events in May. It's not customary, but we do have great events on a very regular basis. And we have, of course, a huge mentoring program that has been in effect for 6 years already, where we match amazing women who are very ambitious, whether they're professional or executive women. We even mentor executive women. We've got a great roster of CEOs, male and female. We all come together to support ambitious women, our governance training, and of course, our parity certification. And support us and follow us on social media. Let's continue the conversation. We've talked about so many really important things here today. We need to continue these conversations, support each other, and ensure that women are behind the camera, in front of the camera, that age is no longer a problem, that background, cultural background, religious background is not a problem, and that all of us can contribute, no matter what our sexual orientation, what we look like, that really doesn't matter. So merci infiniment à vous deux. Merci aussi à toute l'équipe de la gouvernance au féminin, l'équipe permanente comme l'équipe de bénévoles. Et évidemment, cet événement n'aurait jamais pu avoir lieu sans our partners, nos commanditaires. Thank you so much to Alexa Translation, to Air Canada, Ivanhoe Cambridge, La Presse, and the Globe and Mail. And there's also the 58 organizations that have done our parity certification that you need to see, because it's such an amazing roster of organizations from all sectors that we are so proud to have. And just a reminder, for those of you who did not know that we've launched in the United States, Women in Governance USA, we have certified our first American organization, which is Zoom video conference, that we've done with the support of our large partner, Girl Scouts of the USA in New York. So we're very excited about that. And Société Générale, the French bank, is now enrolled to get certified on both sides of the border, Canada and the USA. Alors, on continue notre travail, on continue à s'assurer d'avoir plus de diversité et d'inclusion au Canada, aux États-Unis, et à soutenir toutes les organisations qui souhaitent atteindre ces objectifs. Thank you everyone for watching. Merci beaucoup et à très bientôt. Au revoir.
Au revoir.